It was a warm summer afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs lazily in the sky, casting a soft golden light across the fields. I had just finished my household chores when my phone buzzed. It was my Aunt Linda. She lived only a few miles away on a large property, with an old, weather-beaten barn behind her house. "Hey, can you come by the barn and help me with something? I could use an extra pair of hands," her message said. I didn't hesitate. Aunt Linda had always been the kind of person who was there for everyone, whether you needed advice, a warm meal, or just a listening ear. She was always ready with a smile and open arms. I couldn't refuse her. When I got there, the barn door was slightly open, and the familiar scent of hay and aged wood filled the air. As I stepped inside, I found her at the back, kneeling on the ground, surrounded by tools and supplies. She looked up and smiled, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. At 36, Aunt Linda still carried that same youthful vibrancy, her body toned from years of working on the farm. She wore a loose, flowing blouse that highlighted her curves in just the right way, paired with worn jeans that fit snugly around her hips. "Thanks for coming," she said, rising to her feet and wiping her hands on a rag. "I just need a bit of help fixing this old stall. It's been on my list, but it's really a job for two." "Of course, happy to help," I replied, doing my best to ignore the sudden flutter in my chest as I watched her move. We got to work, hammering nails, lifting heavy boards, and chatting lightly about random things. She talked about the farm, the animals, and her plans for the next season. I tried to stay focused on the task, but it was hard not to notice how close we were, how our hands would occasionally brush as we passed tools. At one point, I reached for a board, and our fingers met briefly, sending a wave of electricity through me. I glanced up, and for a second, our eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, something soft and almost vulnerable. My breath caught, and I quickly looked away, unsure of what to say or do. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice a little softer than before, as if she had sensed the shift in the air. "Yeah, I'm fine," I stammered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. We continued working, but the atmosphere had changed. The casual conversation faded, replaced by an unspoken tension. Each time I looked at her, I couldn't help but notice how her blouse clung to her, the way her hair fell over her shoulders, or how her lips curved when she smiled. After a while, we finished the repairs, and she stood up, stretching her arms overhead. The movement caused her shirt to lift slightly, revealing a sliver of tanned skin. I tried not to stare, but it was hard not to. "That should do it," she said, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Thanks again for helping out." "Anytime," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She walked over to me, her gaze lingering on mine a little longer than usual. "You've really grown up," she said softly, her hand resting gently on my arm. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. There was something in the way she looked at me, in the softness of her voice, that made my heart race in a way I wasn't used to. "Yeah, I guess I have," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We stood there for a moment, the only sounds being the distant chirping of birds and the soft rustling of hay beneath our feet. Her hand stayed on my arm, and I could feel the warmth of her skin against mine. My pulse quickened as she stepped closer, her eyes searching mine for something unspoken. I should probably get going," I said, breaking the silence, though a part of me didn't want to leave. "Stay a little longer," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the space between us, as if she was afraid to ask. I hesitated, torn between the pull of responsibility urging me to leave and the undeniable attraction that held me there, alone with her in the barn. I didn't move. She took a step closer, narrowing the distance between us until I could feel the heat of her body and catch the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the earthy aroma of the barn. Her fingers slid down my arm, sending shivers through my entire body. "Linda," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. But before I could say anything more, she closed the gap between us, her lips gently meeting mine in a kiss that was both soft and electric. Time seemed to stop as I kissed her back, my hands instinctively moving to her waist, pulling her closer. Her fingers tangled in my hair as the kiss deepened, and for a moment nothing else existed, just her, the way she felt in my arms and the way her lips moved against mine. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing heavily, she gazed up at me with those same vulnerable eyes. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know," I replied, still trying to catch my breath. my heart pounding in my chest. She smiled softly, placing her hand on my chest, feeling the rapid beat beneath her fingertips. I didn't want to make things awkward, but I couldn't help it. I stared at her, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. Part of me still couldn't believe it, but another part, the part that had always admired her, always felt drawn to her, knew this had been coming for a long time. I felt the same way, I admitted, my voice just a whisper. For a while, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was thick and almost tangible. Finally, she broke the silence. So, what now? She asked, her voice gentle and uncertain. I looked at her, at the way the fading light from the barn's windows bathed her skin in a golden glow, and at the way her lips still looked slightly swollen from our kiss. I don't know, I answered honestly, reaching up to brush a stray hair from her face, but I don't want this to end. Her eyes softened as she smiled. Then let's not let it with that. She leaned in, her lips meeting mine once again in a kiss that felt even more intense than before. We lost ourselves in each other, the barn disappearing as we surrendered to the passion that had been simmering between us for far too long. Time seemed to blur as we kissed, our hands exploring one another with a hunger that had been growing for years. We kissed again, this time with more urgency and desire than before. My hands found her hips, pulling her closer, and she responded by pressing herself against me. Her fingers tangled in my hair, tugging gently as her lips moved against mine, soft yet demanding, full of a passion that had been building for longer than I could remember. I kissed her deeply, my hands traveling from her waist to the small of her back, feeling the warmth of her body through the thin fabric of her blouse. She gasped softly as I kissed along her jawline, letting my lips trail down to her neck, tasting her skin as she arched her back, offering herself to me. Her breath came in shallow gasps and I could feel the rise and fall of her chest as I kissed her there, my hands now freely exploring her body. Her blouse slipped off her shoulder, and I kissed the newly revealed skin, feeling her shudder beneath my touch. Her hands slid down my back, pulling me closer, her lips finding mine again in a kiss filled with need. The air between us felt charged, like every kiss, every touch was sparking something new. She gently pushed me back against the barn wall, her hands roaming over my chest, slowly unbuttoning my shirt in a way that made my heart race. Her lips followed the path of her hands, kissing down my neck, tracing over my collarbone as she undressed me with a confidence that left me breathless. When her lips found mine again, it was as if the rest of the world disappeared. My hands traced the length of her back, feeling the soft curves of her body as I pulled her closer. My mouth explored hers, her taste intoxicating. She responded eagerly, her body pressing into mine as her hands continued to explore, making me crave more. We lost ourselves in the rhythm of our movements, each kiss becoming deeper, each touch more urgent. She pulled me down to the hay-covered floor, her fingers grazing my skin as we fell together, our lips never parting. The warmth of her body, the softness of her lips, it all felt like something out of a dream, both too intense and too real at the same time. I kissed her neck, her collarbone, letting my lips travel down to the exposed skin just above her jeans. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, feel how her body reacted to every touch. Her hands slid through my hair, gently tugging, guiding me back up to her lips, where we kissed again with a passion that consumed us both. Her hands moved to my jeans, unbuttoning them with ease, and I followed her lead, deftly undoing the buttons of her blouse, sliding it off her shoulders until it joined the rest of our discarded clothes on the barn floor. The heat between us grew as the final barriers fell away, and soon there was nothing left between us but skin and the undeniable pull of desire. Her body felt soft beneath my hands, every curve inviting my touch as we explored one another. Every kiss deepened our connection, her hunger matching my own. She kissed me with an intensity that left me breathless, her hands moving over my body, making everything else disappear but the two of us. We kissed long and slow, savoring the taste of each other, our bodies entwined in a way that felt both new and familiar. Every touch, every brush of her lips against mine sent shivers through me, and I could feel her respond in kind, her body pressing against mine with a need that mirrored my own. As we lay there, kissing and exploring each other, it felt like time had stopped, like the world beyond the barn had completely vanished, leaving only the two of us, lost in the intensity of what we had finally allowed to happen. As we lay together in the warm, dim light of the barn, everything seemed to fall away except for us. The connection between us felt undeniable, each kiss, every touch drawing us nearer. Her hands glided across my skin, exploring every inch, and I followed her lead, my fingers tracing the soft curves of her body beneath me. She gazed up at me, her breath shallow, lips slightly parted. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, but also a deep, unspoken desire that mirrored my own. Without speaking, she pulled me closer, our bodies aligning, as if we had been made for this moment. We moved slowly at first, savoring the intimacy of each kiss, each touch, exploring one another in a way that felt both tender and passionate. The warmth of her skin against mine, the soft sighs escaping her lips, filled the space as we surrendered completely. Her fingers ran through my hair, pulling me down for another kiss, this one deeper, more urgent. The world outside vanished as we moved together, the barn transforming into our private sanctuary. Every kiss was filled with a passion that had been simmering for so long, finally released. We became lost in each other, the intensity growing with every touch, every motion. Her body responded to mine, and I to hers, as we explored each other in ways that made time seem to disappear. Every moment felt heightened, each kiss drawing us closer, until we moved in perfect sync, as one. The warmth between us intensified as we surrendered to the moment, letting go of everything but the desire that had been building for so long. Her hands gripped my back, her lips finding mine again in kisses that blended tenderness and urgency, both of us immersed in the sessions. As the evening light filtered through the cracks in the barn, we reached the peak of our connection, our bodies entwined in a way that made everything else fade away. Every movement drew us nearer, every breath shared, until we finally reached that inevitable climax, our bodies giving in to the overwhelming wave of pleasure that had been rising within us. Afterward, we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, the barn quiet except for the soft sound of our breathing. Her head rested on my chest, and I gently ran my fingers through her hair, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. No words were needed, the connection between us said it all. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows over the barn floor, I realized things between us had changed forever. But instead of uncertainty, there was a feeling of peace, a sense that this was right. We had crossed a line, but we had done it together, and that made all the difference. She lifted her head, looking at me with soft eyes, a small, content smile on her lips. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, her voice quiet but full of certainty. I nodded, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Yeah, we will," I replied softly. And with that, we held each other as the night crept in, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together. She gazed up at me with those soft, knowing eyes, her lips curving into a tender smile. I couldn't resist her, didn't want to. Leaning in, I kissed her again, this time slower, gentler, allowing the warmth of the moment to wash over us. Her lips parted beneath mine, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her heart, still in sync with my own. Her hands slid up my chest, her fingers brushing against my skin as she pulled me closer. I kissed her deeply, savoring the softness of her lips, the way her body melted against mine. The barn felt like our entire world, the silence around us broken only by the gentle sounds of our breathing, blending with the rhythm of our kisses. I moved down, letting my lips trail from her mouth to her neck, kissing her there and feeling the way she shivered beneath my touch. Her hands tightened on my shoulders, her body arching slightly as I kissed the sensitive spot just below her ear, drawing a soft gasp from her lips. We were completely wrapped up in each other, the outside world forgotten, as my hands roamed over her body, memorizing every curve, every line. She responded to every touch, every kiss, her fingers digging gently into my back, encouraging me to continue. Her breath quickened as our lips met once again in a slow, lingering kiss. Her hands moved to my face, cradling my jaw as she kissed me deep and tender, our lips moving together as though we were the only two people in the world. I kissed her back with everything I had, pouring all my emotions, all the passion into each kiss. Every brush of her lips sent sparks through me, and I could feel her responding with the same intensity. We shifted, her body pressing closer to mine, and I pulled her into my lap, our lips never breaking contact. The way she kissed me, slow and deliberate, as if she wanted to make this moment last forever, made my heart race. Her fingers tangled in my hair as she kissed me again, her lips soft and warm, her breath mingling with mine as we remained wrapped in each other. She kissed me with a tenderness that made my heart ache, and I kissed her back just as gently, my hands tracing the curve of her back, savoring the feel of her skin beneath my fingertips. The bond felt timeless, as though the moment would never end, and neither of us wanted it to. Our kisses slowed, becoming softer and more intimate as we held each other in the fading light. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, and I pressed one final kiss to her lips, a promise of all that had just happened and all that was still to come. "Whatever happens," I whispered, my lips brushing hers, "we'll face it together." She smiled against my mouth, her breath warm and steady, her lips finding mine again in one last soft kiss. "Together," she whispered back, her voice filled with certainty. And as we sat there, still wrapped in each other, kissing softly, the world outside felt distant and unimportant, and all that mattered was the bond between us.